As the new Xabi Alonso manager came out, many players switched from long ball counter to quick counter to try him out, and today we'll check out the biggest differences of these playstyles. Here comes Pepe. Welcome everybody, it's time for tactics. The three main aspects I want to cover are the defensive line and how it behaves, how the team moves after losing possession, and what the offensive patterns look like. On top of that, I'll tell you which playstyle I think is better and why. For my in-game footage, I used this formation for a quick counter and this formation for a long ball counter. At the parts against the AI, I used this formation for both playstyles and white kits instead of black ones. Let's start with the defensive line of quick counter. As you see, after a fast attack, the defensive line is pretty far up, quite a bit over the center line. Comparing this to long ball counter, also a fast attack here, the defensive line is a bit further back right at the center line, which means they don't move up as fast as with quick counter. If an attack takes longer, the defensive lines move up even further at both playstyles. Because of this, I tested how far they would actually move if an attack was super slow in an AI match. This is how far they came up with quick counter, and this is how far they came up with long ball counter. At quick counter, the right fullback is a bit further up at the side where the ball is. But apart from that, it's pretty much the same thing. So the difference is not how far they come, but how long they take to do so. And as we've seen at quick counter, they were a bit faster to move forward. There's another big difference though, and that is how they react when the ball is lost. If you look here, the AI is almost at the center line already, and my defenders still haven't started to move back. Only once the ball gets really close, they move. When using long ball counter, defenders start to fall back a lot earlier and a lot further. Now let's get to the single most important difference of these playstyles, which is how the midfield reacts to losing possession. With quick counter, the defensive midfielders are a lot further up the pitch, and they and everyone else nearby will immediately press towards the ball. Now the good thing about this is, this makes the space really narrow. The team tries to lock down the opponent in the second or even last third of the pitch, depending on where the ball was lost. Look how the defensive midfielders immediately press at the player that has the ball. This may often give you good chances if your team gets an interception far up the pitch thanks to early and massive pressing. The bad thing about this, however, is if the opponent manages to escape and pass the ball through your midfield, you have a big gap because your midfield moved towards the opponent, but the defense fell back. Especially if your opponent attacks very fast, this may result in a massive hole in your formation and can leave your defense outnumbered. Even if you have an anchor man or give your defensive midfielder a defensive instruction, this will not solve it. The only way I found to combat this is if you play with two defensive midfielders and give one of them a deep line instruction, because when losing the ball, this player then immediately wants to join your defense, which many times puts him just between your midfield and the defensive line. However, this will make you lose some offensive pressure and has other disadvantages that I'll be talking about in an upcoming formation guide, so use with care. When playing long ball counter, your defense and your midfield, unless using a classic number 10, will not pressure but try to get behind the ball as soon as possible. This, combined with the fact that a defensive midfielder with a defensive instruction will stay back a lot further overall at long ball counter, makes sure that you don't ever have a big gap between your midfield and your defense. If you look here, the defensive midfielder is pretty far back and ready to occupy any important space in front of the defense if necessary. Here you can see that even if your opponent attacks fast, your team will sprint back to give them as few space as possible and leave no gaps for your opponent to exploit. This is the reason why I personally think that long ball counter has a slight edge over quick counter, because it's a lot safer to execute, especially in defense. With quick counter, you often have to defend attacks with even numbers or even outnumbered, which rarely happens with long ball counter. Especially for beginners or casual players, long ball counter is, in my opinion, the better option. The difference is not that big though. If you're good with quick counter, you can still beat almost anyone. let's get to the last aspect, the offensive runs. To be honest, for me, it was pretty similar where and how the players ran. The main difference is when they do it. With quick counter, players do their final runs where they end up at the height of the enemy defense line a lot later at the pitch. If you look here, I'm a bit inside of the opponent's half already, but the players are still not doing their final runs, but staying a bit closer. At this point, one player starts his final run, which is Musiala up here. Being even further up the pitch and getting closer to my forwards, Messi now starts doing his final run, and Neymar does his deep lying forward run where he comes back to receive the ball. So the point where they started doing these final runs is pretty late. Now if we compare this to long ball counter, there's a big difference. I'm still far from the middle line, yet one of my players already starts the classic long ball counter run, which is all the way up to the defensive line of the opponent. See how the next player joins in now, also far away from my player and just as I step over the center line. Now the last player starts his final run. So as you can see, at long ball counter, the players start moving away from you to the goal a lot earlier and when you're still further away from them. Here you can see how if you launch a quick attack, your entire offense will immediately do the long runs all the way as long as nobody is in front of them. The good thing about this is obviously that it's easy to make a long pass and win a lot of space. But the downside is that if players move away from you this early, you sometimes lack close options. Here, Foden goes for a long run away from my player, which removes the passing option in the middle, which makes it easy for my opponent to block my only passing option at the side. With quick counter, even if you make a longer pass, there will always be players that don't immediately run forward but stay down to be a closer option. If you look here, there are many players close to mine, so I always have a player to pass to. Or here, two players are not running forward but wait nearby, so I have more options. As you see, everything has upsides and downsides, but understanding how the playstyles work will improve your gameplay with both of them and playing against both of them. That's it, folks. I hope this video helped you. I'd love if you subscribed, liked, or commented this video. Until then, guys, take it easy. Shaka!